The sun rises over the Bosphorus, painting the waters in shades of amber and rose. And as the first light touches the domes and minarets of Constantinople, the greatest city in the world begins to stir. This is the beating heart of the Ottoman Empire, where 3 continents meet, where the waters of Europe and Asia mingle, and where the legacy of Rome, Byzantium, and now the Ottomans create something unprecedented in human history. Stand with me now at the edge of the Golden Horn as dawn breaks, and let us walk together through streets that have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, through markets that connect distant worlds, and among people whose lives weave the rich tapestry of this magnificent city. The call to prayer echoes across the city before the sun has fully risen, the voice of the muezzin carrying from the Süleymaniye Mosque, then joined by dozens of others, in a cascade of sound that washes over the 7 hills. The faithful are already moving through the streets, their footsteps quiet on ancient cobblestones that have felt the tread of Roman soldiers, Byzantine nobles, and now Ottoman citizens. The air is cool and carries the salt tang of the sea mixed with the smoke of thousands of hearth fires being rekindled for the morning meal. In the residential quarters, wooden houses lean companionably toward one another across narrow lanes, their latticed windows still shuttered against the early light, though here and there a shutter opens and a servant appears to shake out a carpet or lower a basket on a rope to the street vendor below, who is already crying his wares, offering fresh bread still warm from the bakery ovens that have been working through the night. As we descend toward the waterfront, the city reveals itself in layers, each district with its own character, its own rhythm, its own particular blend of peoples and purposes. Constantinople, in this golden age of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, is not one city but many cities occupying the same space, a place where Turks and Greeks, Armenians and Jews, Venetians and Genoese, Arabs and Persians live side by side, speaking a dozen languages, practicing different faiths, yet all bound together by the intricate web of commerce, law, and imperial authority that makes this vast human enterprise possible. The empire's tolerance for its diverse subjects, provided they pay their taxes and keep the peace, has made Constantinople a magnet for talent and trade, drawing the ambitious and the desperate, the learned and the curious from every corner of the known world. The streets grow busier as we approach the commercial heart of the city, and now the true symphony of Constantinople begins to build. The jingle of harness bells announces a camel caravan arriving from the east, the beasts swaying under their loads of silk and spices, their drivers calling out in Persian as they guide their charges through the morning traffic. A water seller passes with his brass cups gleaming, crying his trade in Turkish, offering refreshment from the elaborate fountains that Sultan Suleiman has built throughout the city, as acts of charity and monuments to imperial beneficence. The clatter of wooden cart wheels on stone, the shouts of porters clearing a path, the barking of dogs, the laughter of children darting between the adults on some errand or game of their own creation, all of this blends into a human music that never quite ceases, even in the deepest hours of night, though it ebbs and flows with the city's rhythms like a vast breath drawn and released. Now we enter the covered bazaar, the Grand Bazaar, stepping through one of its many gates into a world that seems somehow both enclosed and infinite. The vaulted passageways stretch in every direction, a labyrinth of commerce where a person could wander for days and still discover new corners, new merchants, new wonders. The light here is different, filtered through pierced stone screens and the occasional skylight, falling in dusty golden shafts that illuminate the goods displayed with an almost sacred glow. The smell is overwhelming in its complexity, the sharp sweetness of cinnamon and cardamom from the spice merchants, the leather tang from the saddlers, the metallic scent of copper and silver, being worked by craftsmen, whose hammers create a constant rhythmic percussion, the perfume of rosewater and ambergris from the shops selling essences and oils, the mustiness of old carpets, and the bright freshness of new cloth. Every breath brings a new combination, every step reveals another treasure. The merchants sit cross-legged on platforms before their shops, some on cushions of fine brocade, sipping coffee from tiny cups while they negotiate with customers in that elaborate dance of offer and counteroffer that can take an hour to conclude a simple transaction but is understood by all participants as part of the pleasure and ritual of exchange. A Venetian trader examines a length of silk from China, holding it up to catch the light, his face showing the careful neutrality of a man who desires something but will not reveal how deeply. The merchant watches him with equal care, knowing that this single transaction might support his family for a month, might allow him to purchase stock for the coming season, might determine whether his daughter receives the dowry that will secure a good marriage. They speak through an interpreter, a young Greek man who translates their words but also their intentions, their subtle signals, their unspoken communications. His services as valuable as the silk itself in facilitating this meeting of distant worlds. In the goldsmith section, craftsmen work with tools and techniques passed down through generations, some of them descended from Byzantine masters who served in these same streets when the city bore a different name and different faith. The continuity of craft transcends the dramatic changes of political power, and the fingers that set emeralds into gold today may move with the same gestures their great-grandfathers used under Christian emperors. The items they create, rings and bracelets, ceremonial daggers with jeweled hilts, ornate belt buckles, delicate chains will adorn the bodies of the wealthy and powerful, will be given as gifts to cement alliances, will be carried across seas and mountains as portable wealth, as tokens of affection, as bribes to smooth the path of business or diplomacy. Beyond the goldsmiths, we find the booksellers and calligraphers, and here the atmosphere shifts, becomes more contemplative, almost scholarly. Books are precious things, each one copied by hand, often illuminated with gold leaf and intricate painted borders that transform the written word into visual art. The calligraphers sit at their work with perfect posture, their reed pens moving across the paper with practiced grace, creating letters that are themselves a form of devotion. For the beauty of the script reflects the glory of God and the excellence of the civilization that produces such refinement. Scholars examine volumes of poetry, works of history, treatises on mathematics and astronomy, legal texts, commentaries on the Quran and the Hadiths, philosophical works translated from Greek and Arabic. Knowledge flows through this city as readily as trade goods, and the intellectual life of Constantinople rivals any center of learning in the world, its scholars contributing to advances in medicine, map-making, engineering, and the natural sciences. We emerge from the bazaar into the sunlight, now climbing toward higher ground, and the great mosques begin to dominate the skyline. The Süleymaniye Mosque rises before us, completed just recently under the direction of Mimar Sinan, the greatest architect of the age, perhaps of any age. Its central dome seems to float impossibly above the prayer hall, supported by half-domes and buttresses that channel the enormous weight of stone into the earth with such perfect calculation that the structure achieves a grace that appears to defy the laws of nature. The four minarets that mark the corners of the complex pierce the sky, their white stone gleaming, their galleries from which the muezzins call the faithful, positioned at precisely determined heights that create both structural balance and symbolic meaning. For Sultan Süleyman is the fourth Ottoman ruler to reign in Constantinople, and the 10 galleries across the four minarets represent his position as the 10th Sultan of the Ottoman line. In the courtyard before the mosque, water flows from an ornate fountain where the faithful perform their ablutions before prayer, washing hands and feet and face in a ritual purification that prepares the body and spirit for standing before God. The courtyard is paved with marble and surrounded by a colonnade that provides shade and shelter, a space that is both preparation for the sacred and a gathering place for the community. Old men sit in the shade discussing theology or politics. Students from the attached madrasa hurry past with their books. Beggars position themselves strategically near the entrance, knowing that the charitable impulse runs strong in those about to pray, and everywhere there is a sense of purpose, of this being a place where the eternal and the everyday intersect. Inside the mosque, the space expands in every direction, the dome overhead creating a volume of air and light that lifts the eyes and the spirit upward. The walls are decorated with tiles from Iznik, their colors turquoise and cobalt, green and coral seeming to glow with inner light, their geometric and floral patterns creating an effect of infinite complexity that suggests the underlying mathematical order of creation itself. Calligraphic inscriptions circle the dome, verses from the Quran rendered in script so beautiful that the words become almost abstract, pure form, yet carrying their message to those who can read them, reminding the faithful of God's mercy and power, of the Prophet's teachings, of the proper conduct of life. The light enters through hundreds of windows, and as the day progresses and the sun moves across the sky, the quality of illumination changes continuously, creating an environment that seems alive, responsive, a space that breathes with the divine presence. From the mosque, we can look out across the city toward the sea, and the view encompasses the scope of human ambition and achievement. The Golden Horn curves below us, its waters crowded with vessels of every description, merchant ships from Venice and Genoa, their holds filled with goods from across the Mediterranean. Fishing boats heading out for the day's catch, ferries carrying passengers between the European and Asian shores, the sleek galleys of the Ottoman navy, their banks of oars shipped and still while they lie at anchor, but capable of fearsome speed when required, and smaller craft beyond counting, the working boats that service the larger vessels, that carry supplies, that collect refuse, that perform the 1,000 tasks required to maintain this great maritime crossroads. The air above the water shimmers with heat as the day advances, and the cries of seagulls mix with the shouts of sailors, and the creak of rope and timber, the songs of the boatmen who row in rhythm, the splash of oars and anchors, all the sounds of a city whose life is inseparably bound to the waters that surround it. The port districts are the most cosmopolitan parts of an already cosmopolitan city, places where languages mix so thoroughly that a kind of hybrid tongue emerges, a trading language that borrows vocabulary from Turkish and Greek and Italian and Arabic, capable of expressing the essentials of commerce and navigation, but little else. Here, sailors from distant ports gather in taverns that look out over the water, sharing stories that grow taller with each telling, speaking of storms survived and fortunes made and lost, of strange lands and stranger peoples, of sea monsters and miraculous escapes, of beautiful women in exotic ports and narrow escapes from pirates or angry husbands. The food in these establishments reflects the meeting of cuisines: grilled fish, fresh from the Bosphorus, lamb seasoned with spices from the spice route, rice cooked with saffron and nuts, flatbread served with olive oil and cheese, dishes that would be familiar in Italy or Greece or Persia, but that have been transformed by their preparation in this particular place where culinary traditions converge and combine. The caravanserais near the port handle the transfer of goods from land routes to sea routes, and vice versa. Massive stone structures built around central courtyards, where camels and horses can be stabled, where merchants can store their goods in secure rooms, where contracts can be negotiated in relative privacy, and bills of exchange can be drawn up with witnesses present to verify the transactions. These are the nodes in a commercial network that stretches from England to China, from Russia to East Africa, and the men who gather here are links in chains of exchange that move silk and spices, coffee and cotton, sugar and slaves, books and weapons, dyes and precious stones, every commodity that human desire and ingenuity have found ways to extract, process, transport, and sell. The financial instruments they use, letters of credit, insurance policies, partnership agreements, are sophisticated tools that allow trade to function across vast distances and among people who may never meet face to face. Systems of trust and accounting that represent centuries of refinement and that make possible the prosperity that builds palaces and mosques, that supports scholars and artists, that transforms Constantinople from merely a large city into a world capital. As afternoon settles over the city, we turn our steps toward Topkapi Palace, the administrative and residential heart of the empire, a vast complex of buildings and courtyards set on the promontory where the Bosphorus, the Golden Horn, and the Sea of Marmara meet, a position of such strategic importance that humans have fortified this ground for thousands of years. The palace is more than a residence for the Sultan. It is the seat of government where the affairs of an empire spanning 3 continents are conducted, where ambassadors from foreign powers come to present their credentials and negotiate treaties, where the Sultan sits in judgment in cases of particular importance or difficulty, where the Imperial Council meets to debate policy and strategy, and where the vast bureaucracy that administers the empire maintains its records and issues its directives. The palace is also a household containing thousands of people, the Sultan and his family, the concubines of the harem, the eunuchs who guard them, servants of every description, officials and functionaries, the janissaries of the palace guard, cooks and bakers, grooms and gardeners, artisans who maintain and beautify the buildings, religious officials who lead prayers and interpret the law. It is a city within the city, a complete world operating according to its own elaborate protocols and hierarchies. The outer courtyards of the palace are relatively accessible, places where petitioners gather hoping to present their cases, where merchants deliver supplies, where soldiers drill and horses are exercised. But as we penetrate deeper into the complex, passing through gates guarded by janissaries whose colorful uniforms and disciplined bearing proclaim their elite status, the spaces become more private, more refined, more laden with symbolic meaning. The courtyards are paved with pale stone and planted with ancient trees. Fountains play in the corners, peacocks strut across the open spaces, and the buildings that surround these spaces are decorated with tiles and carved stone that represent the highest achievements of Ottoman artistry. Everything here speaks of power, but power exercised with refinement and taste, power that has no need to shout but can express itself through beauty and order. In the imperial council chamber, the divan, the Grand Vizier and other high officials meet several times a week to conduct the business of empire. They sit on low cushioned benches arrayed around the room, while scribes record their deliberations and decisions. The discussions range from the mundane to the momentous tax collection from distant provinces, the state of roads and bridges, petitions for justice from subjects who feel they have been wronged by local officials, reports from spies about the intentions of rival powers, military preparations for campaigns in Hungary or Persia or North Africa, the appointment of judges and governors, the allocation of resources for building projects or charitable foundations. The Sultan himself sometimes observes these meetings from a screened alcove, invisible to the officials below, able to hear their discussions and gauge their wisdom and loyalty, a presence that is felt even when unseen, a reminder that ultimate authority rests with one man whose word is law across the vast territories marked on the maps that hang upon the palace walls. The harem occupies its own section of the palace, a forbidden realm guarded by black eunuchs, where the women of the imperial household live in strict seclusion from the outside world. The Sultan's mother, the Valide Sultan, is the most powerful woman in the empire, often wielding significant influence over policy through her son. And within the harem, a complex hierarchy exists among the concubines based on whether they have borne the Sultan children and the favor he shows them. Despite the romantic fantasies that will later develop around the harem, the reality is more complex. It is simultaneously a prison and a place of opportunity, where women from across the empire and beyond, many of them originally slaves, can rise to positions of wealth and influence unimaginable in their original circumstances, but only within the confines of this gilded cage. The apartments are luxurious, decorated with fine carpets and silks. The women dress in elaborate costumes and jewels. Musicians and poets entertain them, but they cannot leave without permission, cannot communicate freely with the outside world, cannot choose their own destinies. Some adapt and even thrive in this environment, learning to navigate its politics and hierarchies. Others suffer the isolation and restriction, pining for lost homes and freedoms. In the palace kitchens, a small army of cooks prepares meals for the thousands who live and work in the complex, and the dishes that emerge from these kitchens represent the culmination of Ottoman culinary art, recipes refined over generations, ingredients sourced from across the empire and beyond. The Sultan's own meals are prepared with elaborate precautions against poisoning, and food tasters sample every dish before it reaches the imperial table. For important occasions, banquets are prepared that showcase the wealth and sophistication of the empire: whole lambs roasted with delicate spicing, rice dishes studded with nuts and dried fruits, dozens of different preparations of vegetables and legumes, pastries so delicate they seem to dissolve on the tongue, sherbets and sweetmeats, coffee served in cups so fine the light passes through them. These meals are theater as much as sustenance, demonstrations of power that leave foreign ambassadors awed and filled with respect for a civilization that can achieve such refinement in all areas of life. As evening approaches, we descend again into the city, now watching as the light takes on that golden quality particular to late afternoon, when the sun hangs lower in the sky and its rays strike horizontally across the landscape, picking out details that disappear in the harsher illumination of midday. The call to prayer sounds again. And again the city pauses in its labors as the faithful turn toward Mecca and prostrate themselves. This collective ritual, creating a momentary unity among people whose daily lives otherwise might never intersect. A merchant and his porter, a scholar and an illiterate laborer, a judge and a beggar, all perform the same gestures and recite the same words, all equal before God if nowhere else. This democratic element embedded in a society otherwise rigidly hierarchical and stratified by wealth and birth and occupation. The shops begin to close as darkness approaches, merchants folding away their goods, craftsmen cleaning their tools, and the streets gradually empty of commercial traffic, though they do not become deserted. Different types of establishments now come into their own: the coffee houses where men gather to drink the bitter black beverage that has recently become fashionable, to smoke tobacco in long pipes, to talk and argue and tell stories and listen to musicians or storytellers. The coffee house is a democratic space in its own way, where conversation ranges freely across topics that might be dangerous to discuss elsewhere, where news and gossip circulate, where public opinion forms and crystallizes. The authorities view these establishments with some suspicion, precisely because they cannot fully control what is said within them, and periodically there are attempts to close them down or regulate them more strictly. Attempts that generally fail because the coffee houses have become too integral to the social fabric of the city. In the streets of the entertainment quarter, a different kind of nightlife begins. Musicians set up in small squares, playing the haunting modal melodies that characterize Ottoman music, tunes that can sound almost like improvisation, but are actually built on sophisticated theoretical foundations, on complex rhythmic cycles and microtonal scales that allow for extraordinary expressiveness. Dancers perform, their movements stylized and symbolic, telling stories through gesture and bearing. Shadow puppet shows entertain crowds of children and adults alike, the flat leather figures projected onto screens by oil lamps, their exaggerated movements and comic timing provoking laughter and applause. Storytellers draw crowds with tales of heroes and lovers, of jinn and magical transformations, episodic narratives that continue night after night, their audiences returning faithfully to learn what happens next. These oral traditions keeping alive stories that stretch back centuries and across cultures, constantly evolving as each teller adds their own embellishments and emphases. The night watch begins its rounds as full darkness falls, groups of men carrying lanterns, calling out to reassure honest citizens and warn off potential troublemakers. Constantinople is relatively safe after dark compared to many cities of this era, the Sultan's justice swift and harsh for those who would disturb the peace, but still it is wise to be cautious, to stay in well-traveled areas, to move with purpose rather than wandering aimlessly. The wealthy travel in sedan chairs carried by servants, curtains drawn to protect privacy and prevent envious eyes from seeing too much. The less affluent hurry home, and the poor settle into whatever shelter they can find, doorways and alleys offering some protection from the elements, if not much comfort. Above it all, the domes and minarets stand silhouetted against the stars, and the lights of the city oil lamps in windows, torches at guard posts, fires for warmth or cooking create a mirror of the heavens below, as if Constantinople exists between earth and sky, partaking of both realms. The sound of the city at night is different from the daytime symphony, quieter but not silent, the barking of dogs more prominent now, the cry of infants, occasional laughter or music from a house where a celebration continues, the regular calls of the night watch, the slap of water against the hulls of boats rocking at anchor. Somewhere a muezzin with an exceptionally beautiful voice sings the call to the night prayer, and the sound carries across the water and the hills, a reminder that even in darkness the faithful are called to remember their obligations and their dependence on powers beyond the merely human. In the morning, the sun will rise again over the Bosphorus, painting the waters in shades of amber and rose, and Constantinople will wake to another day, to another cycle of prayer and commerce, study and labor, pleasure and striving. The city that was Byzantium and before that Constantinople of Rome now serves a new empire, but it remains what it has always been: a crossroads, a meeting place, a crucible where different peoples and traditions encounter each other and create something new while preserving something old. Its strength lies not just in its walls and fleets, but in its ability to absorb and accommodate, to synthesize and innovate, to be simultaneously traditional and dynamic, conservative and creative. The thousands of lives being lived here, from the Sultan in his palace to the porter carrying burdens through the bazaar, together constitute a human achievement of remarkable scale and complexity, a demonstration of what is possible when vision and resources, power and culture combine under favorable circumstances in a location that geography has blessed with advantages both strategic and aesthetic. As we take our leave of this magnificent city, pausing once more at the edge of the Golden Horn to look back across the water at the domes and minarets catching the last light of day, we carry with us images and sounds and sensations that speak to something essential about human civilization at one of its peaks. Constantinople in the 16th century represents a kind of fulfillment, the realization of possibilities that lesser cities might imagine but never achieve. It is not perfect, no human creation can be, but it is extraordinary, a place where ambition and accomplishment meet, where diverse peoples create a cosmopolitan culture richer than any single tradition could produce alone, where beauty is valued alongside utility and refinement alongside strength. The empire that rules from here will eventually decline, will face challenges from within and without that it cannot forever overcome, but in this moment, in these decades of the 16th century, when Suleiman the Magnificent reigns and the power of the Ottomans seems unlimited, Constantinople stands as one of the wonders of the world, fully deserving that designation. A city that rewards every moment spent within its walls, and that remains in memory long after departure, calling us back to its streets and markets, its mosques and palaces, its waterways and hills, inviting us to walk once more through history made tangible, through time made visible, through the accumulated achievements of centuries concentrated in one extraordinary place where continents meet and cultures mingle, and human possibility finds full expression.